Hello and welcome to another edition of Storytelling on Orchard Street. I'm your host, Pete Salamita, and we're in the podcast studios at P&T Knitwear Bookstore at 180 Orchard Street. It's a great bookstore, lots of genres to pick from. There's a cafe and events, so I suggest you check it out. In the studio with me today is Kathy Curto. Kathy teaches at Sarah Lawrence College, the Writing Institute, and Montclair State University, as well as several nonprofit organizations and writing centers in the metropolitan area. She is the author of Not for Nothing, Glimpses into a Jersey Girlhood, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, on NPR, in the anthology Listen to Your Mother, What She Said Then, What You Say Now, and in Barrel House, The Inquisitive Eater, Memoir Magazine, I don't know how to pronounce this one, Ovenque Siamo, I think, O Reader, The Mom Egg Review, Drift and Talk and Writing, among others. Kathy's piece, Still Cooking Side by Side, considered a modern love in miniature by the New York Times, was included in the Best of Tiny Love Stories in August 2021. Kathy lives with her family in Hudson Valley, and her website is www.kathy/ Curto, not slash, that's whatever you call it, Curto.com. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
You have a
I'm
lot.
easy to find. I'm easy to find.
You have a lot of credits.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. And I did a little scoop through the bookstore, and you're absolutely right. It's a great place to be.
Yes,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
So I think I had your volume down a little bit there, but I think it's okay for now. Yeah, so we're going to talk about all that. It's a lot to digest. You're a very busy woman. And you, how far upstate are you?
I live in the Hudson Valley. I live in Cold Spring.
Okay.
Right on the river.
Oh, Cold Spring's
so
beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Did you come from there today, or were you already in the city for something else?
I did do a couple of other things today. Met with somebody who's going to be helping me actually on my next book project, which is exciting. Wow. But yes, so we were about an hour and 15 minutes on the Hudson
I know.
line.
I've been to Cold Spring a few times. By the way, you're for guesting on the show, you're going to be the first owner of the Storytelling on Orchard Street button.
Oh, how cool.
I wish, it's too small to see on the camera. But it's the logo of Storytelling on Orchard Street.
I love.
Yeah, my wife did the logo, and she made the button, too.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, so you're the first recipient of the button.
Okay. I will wear it proudly.
Worldwide.
I promise. I actually I do wear buttons on. I have buttons on my. I keep buttons on my lanyard for my my faculty ID for Montclair. So my students are always like, "Oh, what's that? What's that?" So this will be my one to start the school year with.
Yeah, she just made them.
Very cool.
So I always like to get to know the authors or writers or guests or, on the show, their background a little bit, and then get into what they, have done and other things.
Sure.
And get to hear you read as well.
Absolutely.
And then at some point I might read one of mine as well. So tell me a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up? How do you find the love of writing? That kind of stuff.
Okay. So I grew up on the Jersey Shore. Actually, my first book, Not for Nothing, Glimpses into a Jersey Girlhood, really does kind of capture that. Or at least I tried to, from the perspective of a young girl at a certain period of time. So I grew up on the Jersey Shore.
Where in the
Tom's River.
Okay.
So the beach I went to was, and still is Seaside Park.
Right.
I also lived in Long Beach Island for a while.
Okay.
So that was where I grew up. And then when I went to college, I went off to college, and you really became, I guess you'd say, like a New York resident from that period of time.
What college did you go?
I went to Sarah Lawrence, which I actually work. I teach at the Writing Institute there.
How does it feel to teach where you went to college?
It feels really delightful, actually.
It must be great.
I mean, lots of changes since the 80s, for sure. I graduated in 89 from Sarah Lawrence. I graduated in December of 89. And
when did you start teaching there?
Not for a while after.
Okay, right.
It really was sort of it was an interesting... As I tell my students and my own kids, it's not usually a straight line, or at least it hasn't been for me, and hopefully it won't be as I progress through whatever you want to call it, creative development, career development, artistic development. So just going back for a second, grew up on the Jersey Shore in a pretty traditional Italian American home.
Okay. I'm Italian American also.
I kind of thought so. Worked for my parents for a period of time when I was growing up. My
Doing
parents,
what?
They own. My parents owned a gas station and a car wash business.
Oh.
So
you pumped gas and,
I
and
did.
washed windows?
Actually,
Windshields?
it's very funny. I was saying recently when we were in New Jersey and they were pumping our gas, which is unique for somebody who lives in New York.
Right. I think they still do, don't they?
They do. Yeah. Absolutely do. And I said to my husband, when I was pumping gas and I didn't do windows, I heard about it from my dad.
Sure.
I mean,
Check
it was
the
a
oil.
big deal. So yes, I did.
By the way, I also worked at a gas station
there you go.
for a spell, like in college years. I've done a lot of weird things.
Yeah. It's definitely. I mean, Yes, it certainly does, or it has that work and that coming from that background and those values. It definitely shaped me and continues to shape me. So did that for a period of time and then went to Sarah Lawrence
By the way, can I ask you, did your parents have a love of literature or art of any kind, or it was something you developed on your own?
I would have to say, when I think about my parents and reading, the image that comes to my mind with both of them actually is reading the newspaper.
Okay.
I mean,
Everybody did back then. Yeah.
Both of them
Right.
read the newspaper faithfully
Right.
at different times of the day.
Right. I mean, back then people read multiple newspapers if they were
Absolutely,
into it.
and
Yeah.
we got newspapers delivered. We got the newspaper. There was always the newspaper in the waiting room at my parents, at the business.
Right.
I can honestly say that I didn't come from a family where there were like bookshelves,
Right.
covering the
No,
walls.
my family neither.
Yeah.
And neither parent were artists or musicians or.
My introduction, I guess you'd say, to reading and writing really came through school and the diary. I used my old diaries when I was crafting my book. I still
What was it
have
like to
them.
go back?
I have very mixed feelings about it. Very mixed feelings
Right.
about it. Part of it is hilarious, and part of it is sort of terrifying and horrifying.
Right. Yeah, I bet.
But I have no regrets about keeping them.
Right.
And
No, it's a
actually,
great thing to do.
since that, I've talked to my students a lot about it.
I think that was a very popular thing to do back
Absolutely.
then, especially for, really mostly girls.
Yes, well, I think it has to do with voice,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that, I'm unafraid to say that, I didn't feel it maybe at the time, or maybe I couldn't articulate it. I'm sure I felt it, but I didn't articulate it. But the diary helped me find a voice and have a voice.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think, they made them very, I had the Holly Hobby one with the lock on the side.
Right.
And
Yeah, I remember those.
So that was sort of the girlhood background. And then went off to college. Sarah Lawrence was a real unexpected thing that came flying my direction from a really, really astute guidance counselor, actually.
Why was it unexpected?
Well, it was completely off anybody's radar. I didn't.
Is that a hard college to get into?
It wasn't so much that it was a hard college. It was just a small, it is a small, very progressive, institution. I was looking at and had been accepted to more traditional, larger schools on scholarship. Sarah Lawrence was kind of a bit of a wild card that, again, off my radar. The guidance counselor just said, I think you can get money, and I think that you'd be a good candidate.
Yeah. Especially coming from parents that were
yeah.
on the
I
gas
grew up
stations.
working class. And
Yeah, right.
So that happened, which was amazing, and that really that was a game changer for me. I got there and met. I have very good friends, a couple of very good friends still from my experience there. But I have to say, my experience, honestly, there was less social and more academic and educational. I had never experienced that kind of attention.
Well, that's why you're so successful.
You
weren't wasting your time hanging out in the dorms and getting high.
I really found like that, and it sounds super corny, but there really was magic in the experience of being in a classroom and.
Was
small
Sarah
classes.
Lawrence known for writing?
It's very much known.
literature,
It was and still is very much known for writing. It's also a place that the classes were and still are very small.
Okay.
They're known for sort of the round tables. You have a conference table that's round in most classrooms.
That's pretty cool.
Work with professors is pretty intense and intentional, and it's very it's not for every student, but I think if you're self-directed and you have a desire to sort of combine disciplines, which I did. And that's, I think that can work. So I did that.
How many years in between graduation and starting as a teacher?
So actually many, many, many years.
Oh, okay.
So
Because I was going to ask you,
yeah.
I thought it was
no,
not that,
it's many years. So
Were there any teachers that you had still teaching?
there were teachers I had who, if I didn't have them, I wouldn't be a writer. There's absolutely no, I completely believe that. Like,
Right.
there's no question about that.
Or were they still there when you started as a teacher?
No,
Oh,
no. But what happened in my situation, and because you asked sort of about the trajectory, I graduated from Sarah Lawrence, and because I did combine my two really most fierce interests, which were creative writing and sociology, those were the disciplines that I studied the most at Sarah Lawrence. I went and I pursued sociology and actually pursued a social work degree and went to Hunter right after Sarah Lawrence.
Wow.
Earned an MSW and worked in the South Bronx for several years as a social worker,
Holy
community organizer. So
where
I wasn't
where
doing.
were you living at the time?
I was actually living in Yonkers for part of the time, and then I moved up to Curto, and I moved in with my then boyfriend, who's now husband.
Oh.
So I was commuting,
So you
but
were
I was
married
living
a
in
long time, I
Yonkers.
guess.
Actually, tomorrow we'll be married 32 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Can you believe
Tomorrow.
that? Tomorrow is our anniversary, yeah.
Well, tomorrow,
Happy anniversary, honey.
Yeah.
So I did, I'm still a social worker.
Right.
I feel like once you do that,
Right.
you never are not doing that. But
Right.
I did that for a block of time. Then
When you were a social worker, were you writing?
I absolutely was writing.
Okay.
I was writing a lot of work-related writing,
Right.
obviously recording what was going on in the course of the day, grant writing, but I was also doing some personal journaling.
Okay.
And I did a couple, actually my first published piece was a piece that I did after working around the community that was struggling with AIDS at that time. So this was the very early 90s.
Right.
And that was actually my it was called First Person in the local paper, and I had been in a meeting where a mom was talking about changing her adult son's diapers, and I was completely just floored by the emotion that I felt, obviously the emotion that she communicated that story with. And I wrote about it. And then I remember asking her if it would be okay if I sent it in, because it was a very, very short piece.
Right.
And that was my first published piece about like sort of being on the sidelines, but listening to that story. And then when I started having my children, I journaled while I was, becoming a mom, becoming a parent, journaled through that experience. But so the teaching of writing really did not happen until after I earned my MFA.
Okay.
In like 2012.
Okay.
So it was a process.
Right.
Like so many other things.
Back to the writing about the young person that was parent had to change his diaper. I spent about 8 or 9 years in the 90s working for Lifebeat. It was an organization that raised money for AIDS, did outreach, but my job was to get musicians and other performers to go to hospitals.
Oh, wow.
So at the pretty much the peak of the epidemic, I know what it's like.
Sure,
and I saw,
sure.
I would go multiple times a week to different hospitals. It's intense.
Intense time.
Yeah.
Are you a musician?
I was a drummer for a long,
were you? My
I was
son
in
plays
bands
the
for
drums.
like 40 plus years.
Oh, wow.
I kind of consider myself semi-retired. If somebody asked me to sit in on something, I might do it. But generally speaking, I'm concentrating on poetry. Came late in life for me, so I found that it's kind of my new love. And although I do combine it with music, the guitar you heard is Fredo Genziano.
Okay.
Another drummer, my longtime friend. He developed a passion for guitar. I developed a passion for poetry, and we started working together.
Yeah. I love to hear stories like that. I love it. I just listened to a great podcast with Patti Smith talking about music and poetry.
Right. Well, she's one of she's one of the queens of it.
I literally am like hearing her voice. I
Right.
listened to it on my walk 2 days ago, and I'm hearing some of her lines in my head still.
Right. Did you like her when she first came out?
Oh my gosh, I actually didn't listen to her. I mean, I was younger then.
Okay.
I really can't say I listened to her a lot until I want to say the last 10 to 15 years probably.
Okay, right.
I mean, I'm a Springsteen fan, so
Oh,
clearly,
yeah.
her version of "Because the Night," right, is
Oh, she's a great version.
iconic.
I went to Newport's for a year, State University.
Oh, okay.
And I was on the band, the stage crew for the concerts, and Patti Smith came.
Oh, very
So I saw
cool.
her in '75, and then in
Oh, wow.
'76, I think, I was beginning to become a big Springsteen fan with
Yeah.
some friends of mine, and we went to see him at West Point.
Oh my gosh!
In like
wow.
this 3,000 seat
That's
auditorium.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, my parts because actually I'm not far from New Paltz.
Right.
One of my writing mentors lives in New Paltz, and I can see the tip of one of the West Point towers from my backyard. Actually,
okay.
from our house. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it up there.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place.
So you wrote one of your favorite topics is power of community. So does that come from the being a social worker?
I think so. I mean, I definitely.
And what do you mean by that specifically
Yeah.
for writers?
So I guess it's kind of twofold for me as a writer, and I would even extend this out to artists, who work in other forms and mediums. I think that community can mean being open to receiving from a community, being a good listener, paying close attention. I was just meeting with a friend colleague who's going to be helping on my next project, and we were talking about, and I know this sounds really cliche, but like really the power of just like the tiniest little things that you see. And in New York, it's open
Loaded.
for, it's
Yeah.
loaded. You just,
Right.
you don't even have to open your eyes in the morning. You
Yeah.
can just roll over and,
Right.
hear stuff. And so I think in one aspect, community matters because there are communities that we can find material, ideas, inspiration, just little nuggets
influences,
of things. Influences,
yeah.
absolutely, around us all the time.
Inspiration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I consider a family, a workplace,
Right.
a neighborhood, all of those things are communities.
Do you read?
Church.
Like do public readings?
Yeah, I do. I actually do a decent amount of readings. It's interesting. I obviously always get nervous, and maybe not obviously for some people, but I do.
Right.
I think there is something good when you do still get nervous about something, just
Right.
even a little bit.
Of course. Well, Frank
yeah.
Sinatra used to say, if you go on stage and you're not a little bit nervous, then you should quit.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
there's truth
right,
to that.
yeah.
I think that
I
there-
get crazy when I'm going to perform.
I definitely. I
can't
think
do
that it's
anything
like
else.
energy. There's like an electricity that is
Yeah.
running through you.
Right.
So I do some public readings. I like to bring.
Are there
my
any
work.
upstate that you can go to, or is it you come to the city for
I
it?
come to this. I've done some stuff at Bryant Park. I've
Okay.
read in the park in the reading room as well as moderate the panels there for the reading
Okay.
room in the summer,
Right.
which is a lot of fun. I've read with an organization called Writers Read. I'm on the board of the Italian American Writers Association, so we do monthly
Okay.
salons. We were in person in the city. We're now on Zoom, and I think we'll be in person again.
Nice.
So no, I do enjoy reading, and I think that kind of extends to the other piece of the community. So you have just obviously your regular or everyday community, however you define that I think can be a source of inspiration. But the other part of it is the writing community and
Right.
how the writing community that you define as your own, and maybe it's just a couple of people who you have
Sure.
coffee with
Right.
every week,
Right.
how they can be a help to you as a writer, as a
Right.
maker. I
I,
think we have to be like communicative because it's a solitary act.
I think you might be the first guest I've had on that I had never met at all.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure about that. Typically, I know the people I ask, or have met them at other
Okay.
readings. It was Claire that introduced
Claire,
us.
who I
Right.
just actually wrote a little review of I love her book.
Her book is great.
I love her
and
book.
I've been to
Shout
a lot
out to It Was Her New York, really.
Yeah, Claire Moed. I've heard her read quite a few times. Been at readings with
Yep.
her.
I'm going
She's
to see her
fantastic.
this weekend with
She's
the
so
Poetry
cool.
Festival. She's amazing.
But that book is great. She was.
I love that book.
Yeah, she was a guest here on,
Yep.
on the podcast.
She did
and we
connect
talked-
us. Yes.
Yeah, right.
And that is an
So
example.
now that's a community.
That is
Yeah.
that is a perfect example.
Yeah.
And Claire, I met through an alum of Sarah Lawrence. Her partner Ted is an alum who studied with someone that I studied with, Joe Papaleo, who really shaped my writing work and even continues to in some to many degrees actually. That's how I came in contact with Claire through
Cool.
Ted. So that idea of like being in contact with people, storytelling, like storytelling on Orchard Street,
Right.
this kind of thing, live storytelling, meeting in groups, having a writing group, being open to that. Because writing, when we're in the writing zone, as you know, is like ecstasy. I
Right.
mean, it's amazing. And you're like just you and your language and your words and your work. but it can be lonely.
It starts off as a solitary thing,
yes.
and then you can bring it out, and it becomes like two different things, really, to some
Agreed.
degree.
Agreed.
So I told you I started late in life, and then I wound up with a lot of what I thought were pretty good poems, and a friend of mine helped me put it out. But then it opened. It was during the pandemic too. So it opened up like this whole new life for me, because I was feeling kind of isolated, and some of the writing was kind of a response to the isolation,
Sure.
not just from the from the pandemic itself, but you know how you age, you lose people, they move away, they pass away,
Absolutely.
they go.
I totally understand.
Some of your networks kind of disappear. So I was feeling
Transitions.
stuck and kind of
Sure.
and it opened this up and readings and meeting people.
So great.
And I do a variety show too, so that where I invite poets and musicians, and I have a comedian that it's called the Very Swell Variety Show, and it's at Young Ethel's. The next one is September 7th. So now that opened that door for me. I have that. So there's all this, and now you're talking community. And
Absolutely.
And if everybody kind of does little different things like that, you're really expanding the arts.
And I think what you said, I mean, a lot of what you just said, like the root of it started from feeling a certain feeling. And you decided, whether you did it consciously or not, you made something with that. You made art, you made poetry, you pulled people together, you came up with other ideas. Like that is how people sort of learn and send messages to one another, that it's doable.
So
and also transitions. I feel like life transitions.
So we're pretty. I'm sorry, we're pretty far into this. I want to make sure you read something.
Oh, okay.
I also want to show the book.
Yeah, that's the book.
This is your book, Not for Nothing: Glimpses into a Jersey Girlhood. I appreciate you giving me a copy. There
Of
it is,
course,
like
that's
that.
your.
You going to read from that or other sources?
I have a couple. I can read from that, and I have a couple of other pieces. So we'll kind of we'll see where it goes.
Out of all the things you've had published, including the book, what's your favorite?
Oh gosh, that's a really hard question. It's funny when you ask me that. I think more about what I felt like when I was writing it, as opposed to like which one I like the best in terms of the product.
Right.
I think I am gonna maybe what I'll do is start with. I'll start with this piece because you just said I brought you the book, and I'm like, it kind of is the same theme, because this was a piece that was recently published, and it's super short, and it was published in 5 Minute Lit, which is a shout out to them. It's a great online magazine that publishes pieces that are 100 words exactly and represent a 5-minute block of time in a person's life. So this is like a 5-minute story, a story about a 5 minutes. Yeah.
Right.
And it kind of has to do with not walking into somebody's place empty-handed. So it's called Coffee Cake.
I love coffee cake.
Of course you do. And you probably had it when the company came over, right?
Yes.
With your parents. So this is Coffee Cake. Don't you dare walk in empty-handed, my mother yells to me from the kitchen. I am 17, locked in our hall bathroom, getting ready for dinner at Veronica Clark's house. Veronica lives in the ritzy part of town. Makeup needs to be just right. I lean closer to the medicine chest mirror and flick the mascara wand up, up, up. Stop and pick up a nice coffee cake for dessert, she says. I stare into the mirror and see myself handing coffee cake to Veronica's mother, or God forbid, her brother Ryan. I look away. More mascara. Up, up, up. That's Coffee Cake.
Nice.
Yeah, these are like that. That's a short, that's like a short prose piece. I do a lot of that.
When you said coffee cake and family, it reminded me of my mother. She had 2 sisters that lived in the same town. They grew up in Rockville Center, and they lived, in Rockville Center as they raised their families in Rockville Center. And they used to have a coffee clutch every week. Sometimes the brother would come, but not too often, or the brother's wife. And a lot of, coffee cake.
I have to say, I meet people for coffee all the time. I'm a coffee drinker, so start with that. I meet people for coffee a lot. I obviously, being in New York, being anywhere these days, I feel like there's always.
I work in a cafe.
Do you work in a cafe?
So I see people do this.
You see,
but I don't do it
me,
myself
like
too
every
often.
day. You see a version of me, all day long, right?
Yeah.
I totally understand that there's an irritating aspect to it. You see a lot of like funny, quirky stuff about like how many different kinds of coffees there are and different versions and different milks and all that. There can be a sort of a comedic aspect to that. But I think at the end of the day, like, it's a community thing.
I was going to say
like,
that.
it's
You're
people.
back to the community.
I mean, I would
Right.
much rather, be dealing with like an overkill on the different varieties of coffee and have people be together
Right.
and like meeting for coffee than what other options are available to us, which is not getting together with people.
Right.
So my students know. I mean, I teach college, and then I also teach adult students, and they know I'm usually like, okay, we'll meet for coffee to talk about that.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coffee and cake.
Yep.
Two important
Yep.
things for
Yep.
that.
Growing up, I mean, like, you obviously come from a similar,
Right.
space. That was the thing. Like, my mother was a great cook and she entertained a lot, but it wasn't like people came over for big elaborate dinners, friends necessarily. Family always. There was
Right.
always the Sunday dinner at like
Yeah.
1:00 in the afternoon.
Grandparents or
but
whatever.
friends would come for coffee.
Okay.
And that was a thing, like coming for coffee at night. And there was usually a cake of some sort,
Sure.
and usually it was like Italian cookies or like a coffee cake.
My parents actually did do a lot of entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I got that from them too, because me
Yep.
and my wife have over the years.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they did actually have a lot of like little small parties
Nice.
and stuff.
Yeah.
So what else would you like to highlight in all the things that you've
I mean, I
written
guess,
and done?
I guess the other thing, kind of, well, I guess moving from the idea of community and more like the latter that I had mentioned, like the idea of using community in terms of like with other writers and a writing group or just getting together with people to talk about the process. I think it can be helpful as well. Another point that I make in conversations like this or to my students to
By the way, you do teach poetry or
I teach
writing?
mostly I teach creative nonfiction and
Okay.
memoir.
Are you more nonfiction?
More nonfiction,
Okay, I'm
more
sorry.
like
Yeah,
personal
Right.
essay. The thing about it is I do write some poetry. I'm going to be at the poetry festival actually with
Okay,
Klaus Claire
cool.
there
Right.
this weekend
Are you
on Governor's
are you
Island.
reading?
I'll be reading with I'll be reading with the Italian American Writers Association. So
Oh,
very
okay.
shout out to them.
Right.
Shout out to all the people that go. And I don't know when it'll probably be after that. Probably.
I'm going to try to get it up before then.
It's
Yeah.
such a. I love going.
I hope
This
the
is my
weather's
third
good.
year.
Yeah.
It's my third year. I love going. It's just really good energy
I
there.
hope the weather
I
breaks
know.
from this heat.
I know. It would be hard to be there all day in this heat.
Yeah.
So yes, I do write a little bit of poetry. I use a ton of poetry as a nonfiction writing teacher.
Right.
I'll start my classes with a poem and
Okay.
tell my
That's
students
the-
this is how we're going to begin.
Right. That's a good way to break it into.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I do teach different ages, mostly young adults and adult students. And when I say adult students, some of my students are in their 70s and 80s.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And so to sort of extend on the idea of community, a lot of times, students will come into the class and know that they want to write something, have an idea of a little bit of what they want to write, but don't know precisely how it's going to pan out, like
Sure.
the exact shape of the piece or what it's going to look like. And that's an opportunity for the community, whether it's two people or the class, to say like, calm down. It's okay. You don't have to know everything when you put the pen to the paper or put your fingers on the keyboard. Just have a little faith and just let your ideas flow. I tell people all the time, use lists. Like, just if you don't know exactly how you want to shape your piece, whether it's a short prose piece like I just wrote, or an essay, or a chapter in a memoir, if you don't know how it wants to be shaped, or you don't know how you want to shape it yet, just start a list of all the things you know you want to include in there.
Right.
Maybe it's an expression, maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's an
or
object,
character,
or a character,
right.
or something you remember smelling or tasting. I mean, I know when you and I had our conversation initially, you said, what kinds of things do you enjoy talking about? Another thing is senses. I use the senses a lot. I teach a class called Tap the Senses. I think senses.
How so? How does that work? Like,
So I think that, in very, very specific terms, to answer your question, I will bring like Play-Doh, perfume. I'll bring in like really itchy fabric. I'll bring in
is this to elicit
cigarettes.
Is this to elicit memories?
Yes. By the way, I don't light the cigarettes.
Right.
But like,
Yeah.
especially
Right.
in my classroom. But just things that
Do you ever bring coffee cake to elicit memories?
Actually, I haven't done that, but I probably will now that you said it. Things, but certainly taste. I bring in sprigs of rosemary, crayons, like things that, and I ask my students, like, tell me what other things I can bring in that
Right.
represent what you would, because what my memories are going to be different from other
Sure.
people's, obviously. But I actually bring objects in, and we go around the room and we smell them, we touch them, we think about it. I'll ask students sometimes to bring in photographs. So senses, the senses, what we have available to
Right.
us just in our human bodies,
Uh-huh.
and in our emotional lives, I think are material. Like, we have tools, to
Sure.
get pieces, scratch into some pieces. So that's something I do. The Tap the Senses class, we have each week is a sense, and we read literature from writers who've captured the senses really beautifully on the page. Poetry is obviously, we're all over that with sensory work. So yeah. So I think that giving people a chance to not have an idea or know precisely what they're doing, still giving them a chance and giving them encouragement to go to the page and be, have. And when I say faith, it doesn't have to be religion based. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Just really have faith that you are scratching into something.
Right.
You're chiseling into something that you're going to land on something at some point, but it's going to take time.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure that you feel that way as a poet, as a musician.
Well,
I
think poetry is. This is just my impression. I've never really written prose. I have a couple of short stories that I'm almost finished with, but generally speaking, it's poetry. A lot of time, very rarely do I sit down with an idea like I'm going to write about this. Sometimes it's just from a sentence.
Yeah.
A sentence that sounds like once. Here's a good example. Once I took some stuff out of some change out of my pocket and put it in a little tray,
Right.
and there was a button in it.
Yep.
And then I just thought that image of a button in a
yeah.
coin jar, and I got the idea of memories mixed like a button in a coin jar.
Oh, my
and I wound
gosh.
up writing about a musician who was older, and his wife had died, and music was getting harder for him to do, and it just came from that one thing.
I love
and
that.
I didn't, and a lot of times I'll write stuff and I really don't know where it came from at all.
That's great. I think that's
It's as if somebody else wrote it. I know
well,
it
it's a
sounds weird,
muse.
but yeah.
If you believe in the notion of a muse, however you understand or experience that idea, I do believe that there is some truth to that.
But I'm truthfully, I'm old enough to have experienced other people's lives,
right.
reading and
Right.
so it's probably in there because you accumulate
Right.
these thoughts and ideas throughout your life.
Sure.
And I think when you're older, you've lived stuff and it comes out.
Absolutely. And
Right.
that's also why I love teaching the range of ages that I do, because when I do teach people, I love working with college students. I adore it. I really love being on a campus. There's a great energy. I feel like I learn a ton about
Right.
what's happening.
It's good to have that youthful energy around.
Absolutely. And there's also some degree of magic about working with an 80 or over year old person who is mining their memories
Right.
about what their lives have been like,
Wow.
and knowing that they're at this particular chapter in their life too, even if they're very lively, active, healthy people.
Sure. Which is, I guess, what I'm saying. What I do.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
I think that's really, it's valuable. I think it's a beautiful act. I think, and to some degree, and I know I've said this before on podcasts or things, and people are like, "What do you mean by that?" I do think that it's an act of service. Actually, I really think it is an act of service to share a life experience with others. I think there's some kind of
We
exchange.
learn from
absolutely
humanity.
Absolutely.
Before we get too much further into this, why don't you read something else?
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
So
I want to
that
make sure you
was-
get some reading in.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a piece a little bit about, I'll read something about my dad. This was actually in Memoir magazine in 2022.
Can I ask you about your parents? Are they still
Sure.
with us?
My parents both are deceased.
Sorry.
So they
Me
both,
too.
they both met years ago. I was,
Okay.
my mom passed away very suddenly, actually, when I was 31. So
Wow.
it'll be, I can't even believe it it's bizarre. You lose your parents and your whole
Yeah.
life changes. So
Right.
it'll be 26 years in November. And my dad was a few years after that. So
Right.
it's been a long time.
So they were young.
But it's interesting because, again, going back, Patti Smith mentioned this too, but other people have, and I've mentioned it in part. I really do feel like in part why I continue to write about them and about language and about experiences is because I do miss them and I do want them. And I can have them
Right.
when they are on the page with me.
Right.
Sometimes it's not a pretty picture. Sometimes I mean, and again, it's my depiction or my memory. I'm open to that. I have siblings, and I say it all the time. This is my version. Like, this is my side of the, not side, but I do love when I can be with them in a way that feels like it, I don't know, it just feels real.
I started writing around the time probably when my mother was dying. It took her about a year and a half.
How long ago was that?
They were both in their 90s.
Oh, wow.
So they had lived good lives.
Wow.
And they were healthy into their 90s.
Wow.
So she died in 2014, my father in 2018.
Okay. So actually similar, it was like a similar shortly after.
And you know what? I spent more time talking and being with my dad in those 4 years than I might have ever done in my life.
Right.
Because when I was a kid, he was working all the time.
No, that's fair. Yeah.
He worked in the post office and then owned a store. So he worked all the time. And so did my mother.
And there's generational stuff there too, because
right.
it wasn't as encouraged, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like years ago, there wasn't an encouragement for both parents to be fully active and involved in their child's lives.
No, you went outside, get out.
Exactly.
and plus I was one of 7, so how much time are you going to get with each parent?
And where were you in the birth order?
6.
Oh, wow.
But I did write a lot about my father. You know. Yeah. Okay, so let's hear what you got there.
This was a piece. So this is called Hats and Newspapers, and actually it does kind of go back to the idea of the senses. I mean, this came out of an experience, as I note here. Hats and newspapers. I wear beanies. When I tug that soft circle of wool onto my head and down over my ears, I'm 20 years younger. In my 40s, that may have been the reason for loving them, but not anymore. The 50s are different. Now I just adore the way my head feels held together and pleasantly compressed, like a girdle for my thoughts, and God knows they need support. Then there's this. I'm hopelessly devoted to reading the actual newspaper, and I call it the paper. This makes me even more hopeless and devoted. But the newspaper and the hat together, that hasn't happened in decades. My father called me names, made me cry, and one time even threw my plate of Easter frittata at the wall because he said I was being fresh. But he was the best newspaper hat maker ever. When we made them together, mean names and hot tears and broken plates of frittata melted from my view. What I saw instead, ink-stained, rolling fingers folding paper creases with care, hands guiding mine, never pressing hard, never pinching or hurting, thin smoke lines from his cigarette in the ashtray rising from its tip. Unforgettable. They were newspaper masterpieces, edges crisp and sharp, corners tight. I remember trying to read the headlines when they were done. Come here, closer, doll, he'd say. Then he'd take a long drag, exhale, place the hat on my head, and wink. Those were the good days, when my father's corners were loose, edges soft.
Wow, I love that.
Thank you.
That's
Do you remember
great.
those hats?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's good to have. I love the way you juxtaposed a tough memory with a nice one.
Yeah. Well, that was actually a challenge for me when I was writing my book because, my book is, some people have, it's funny, people have said people have said all different things, and I love hearing, still, it's kind of cool because it's like, came out in 2018, and it's kind of cool. You forget, like, when you're writing, I don't know if you experienced this, but like, when you're writing a book and then it gets published, you think like, okay, done. But like, the book is actually out in the world. And even if it's 4 years later or 5 years later, like, people read it, and some people are nice enough to like write a review still or be in touch with you. And so the range, sad, kind of tragic, hilarious. But that was something that I did want to capture in the book because it was really scary at times being in a household where my father's moods were like very extreme.
Did he serve in the war?
No, well, he was in the Navy for a period of time,
Okay.
very short, very, very short period of time.
Because I think my father's generation.
And the culture too.
Right.
I know. I mean,
I'm older than you, and my parents were probably. I mean, much older than your parents, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a host of reasons and issues that were floating around.
Only child?
No,
Yes,
I'm not. I'm
okay.
actually the youngest of 4,
Okay.
and I'm the youngest, and my brother, who is actually a pretty significant character in this book, is almost 10 years older than me.
Okay.
So they are close in age, and then I came kind of unexpectedly.
Oh, okay.
My mom was nearing 40. My parents had been separated a couple of times before I was born, and then they separated again, when I was, and that's part of what the book is about too. So, yes, so I thank you for kind of noting that in this very short piece, because I did, I wanted the reader to know that like this was not rainbows and sunshines all the time, but I was able to remember something tender and be able to capture that or just make space for that.
I mean, the thing we don't know growing up is what our parents are going through.
That's right.
My sister found or had or shared with me a photograph. It was a selfie of my parents, and they were so young. It might have been before my brother was born, or maybe he was just born. It was such a different like feeling seeing that picture because I didn't know them then. Yeah. And then I wrote the poem based on that picture, and the idea of the poem was, it was about my father. Like, I didn't know that person.
You didn't know that man.
I only knew the man that had 7 kids, he didn't even graduate high school, right? Served in the war. He loved my mother, but he had so many stressors, and he was pretty intense, and he had a tough childhood himself. So that probably came out in how he dealt with us.
Sure.
I
agree with you. I totally agree with you. And it's just a really important, like sensitive and compassionate thing to sort of put out there when we talk about how we were raised. I mean, as a social worker, as a person who is very much emotionally interested in myself and the world.
But you also must see so many broken families.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to hold space and make space for those stories and those, those recollections. And I also think it's important to do what you just did, and that is to sort of be speculative and say, but the reality is I don't know some of
Although the poem ends with, I got to know him later in life, and he was obviously a much different person. He was much softer, and I'm really thankful that I got that. It was like I used to go visit him and I'd make him lunch or soup or whatever it was, and you shouldn't have to work, you shouldn't. And at the time, sometimes it felt like, I'm driving. It wasn't that far, but
where was he? So where
Rockville
was
Center?
Okay,
it's not that far, but sometimes traffic, an hour and a half to get there.
Sure.
And I think I got more out of it than he did. Because I got to see I got to talk to him, I got to see a different side of him, and I'm glad that I was able to help him later in life. But, we don't know we don't know what our parents are going through.
There's actually a lot and in fact, interesting.
And they hide a lot of stuff too.
Sure, of course, a lot of secrets.
The old Italian families.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But you're right, the not knowing, just with families, but also in general, I think is also part of what I feel like going to the page is a way to figure things out, to like learn. We don't have to know everything when we go to the page.
Right.
We can go to the page because we don't know something and we want to figure it out.
Right.
We're curious.
But the 2 things you read were, they said a lot in a little.
Oh, thank you. Well, that is my hope. I mean, I really do try to distill. First of all, I'm a very slow writer. I'm a very slow reader. It takes me a long time to do things like this. I can do other things pretty quick. I can make certain foods like in a flash, and do other things quickly. But writing and reading, I work pretty slowly. And I've come to like sort of accept that.
Yeah. Well, why beat yourself up?
Exactly.
You're
right.
Who
I am.
You've been very accomplished.
Thank you.
Tell me about how small can be beautiful, or is that kind of what we're talking about?
Well, it's kind of what we were talking about, I think. I think writing shorter pieces and landing on knowing that is what, where I feel sort of most at home. I mean, it doesn't mean I can't write a long essay. I have written longer essays. I've written scholarly work and things like that. But really being able to distill either a moment or like a detail in an object, or even just a detail in like a gesture even.
Right.
To be able to distill that and like linger on it for a little bit. That's what I mean about the small being beautiful. I think there are opportunities, and again, corny alert, but I think there are opportunities every day to find something that is unexpected and like sort of delightful and beautiful. Ross Gay, I don't know if you've read the Book of Delights, but it's one of my favorite, more contemporary bodies of work, and he has a couple after that too. He's a poet, and the Book of Delights I use in my classes, and it's just, it is a book about delights and about observing the world around him, but it's not without pain and you know, and sadness and some, you know, anger, and I mean, it's definitely got it captures.
I tend to capture more of those
No.
things in my writing.
Right. And I, you know, it's funny because I'll say to my students, okay, we're going to read an excerpt from the Book of Delights, and I know that sometimes there's a little eye rolling, and I'm like, but hold on, give me a chance. You know, some of what he's talking about are things that we need to address.
Right.
Racism,
right.
hatred. You know, you can observe a delight in the midst of something horrible. You know. Obviously, I know that depending on where you're coming from, you know, what your resources are, what your level of privilege and your level of, you know, where you start has something to do with that too. And I completely recognize that. But I do think small, and I tend to focus on small in all different ways.
Right.
When I do that, I feel that I capture something that I can't if I'm just thinking too broadly.
Right.
Yeah.
But you wrote a full.
I did
memoir.
write a full book. That's a pretty short book, but
Right.
a lot of the chapters are short.
But then again, this goes over a period of your life.
This
so.
goes over. This is it is a memoir, and it covers about the age of 5 to like 19.
Right.
So it's a very specific period of time.
Right.
I wrote it. It's chronological. It's written in glimpses. It took me a long time to come up with using that subtitle. But yes, and some of the chapters are one paragraph, and some chapters are 4 pages.
Are you working
pages.
on anything new?
I am working on something new. I'm excited about it. It's different. I was just meeting with somebody today, actually, just a few blocks from here, about the cover. And it's an anthology. So I am going to be editing a collection of other people's work,
okay.
which I'm really excited about.
Right.
Again, community.
Sure.
This feels like the right next step for me in terms of a book project.
And where are the authors? You finding the authors from?
They're actually from all over, and they are multi-genre. I have some illustrators. I have some poets. I have nonfiction. I have a fiction writer.
Cool.
But I'm excited about having people who don't just represent one
Right.
area of.
How far into it are you?
The idea actually stemmed from writing this book, because 3 chapters in this book.
When was this book written?
This was it was written. It took me 12 years to write.
Right.
And
it was
it
published.
was published in 2018.
Okay.
So in the book, after I wrote the book, I realized some things. And by the way, that for your listeners who are writers, I think this happens. It happens to me all the time. Like after I write something, I'll be like months or maybe even years later, oh, so that's what that was about.
Wow.
So this book, a couple of things surfaced about some sort of ideas and themes that kept rotating through. And one theme was waiting, the idea of how we wait, what we wait for, how much waiting, I did for a block of time as a child, waiting for things to happen or not happen. And that was a theme that kind of stayed with me. So, that's the loose theme here of this collection.
The theme for the collection.
Yes,
I was going to ask you if there was
that is the
a theme. Right. Like I said, I like to read.
Yeah, please.
things.
I'm excited.
Should I do it now, or do you want to read something?
No, I'd love to hear your work.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It's called Outstanding Young Man.
And is this from the book, or is this new?
No, this is new.
Okay.
Yeah. I just gave my manuscript for the second book to my friend who put the first book out.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so.
That's exciting. It's
Yeah.
like you're giving away this.
Yeah.
That's a big leap, right?
I actually had it all put together a year ago, and then I sat on it. And I'm glad I did, because I've written a lot of good things since then. I was able to take out some things that were maybe weaker and think about it more and reread everything again.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is Outstanding Young Man. Johnny played with plastic soldiers while his sister hugged her rag doll. He aimed his toy gun at the enemy in garbage-strewn lots and climbed hills with weight on his back. Johnny had a sweetheart who was his queen at the prom. What a handsome couple, everyone said, so young and full of promise. Johnny joined the ROTC while his roommate got stoned. Johnny was patriotic to the core, just like his dad and grandpa. Johnny went overseas where artillery blasts rattled his brain. He fought the nightmares, praying to find daylight in the company of his bride. Johnny went home a hero until he struggled keeping jobs and wound up on the welfare line. Johnny had pain so deep even from himself it was hiding. Johnny woke up sweating, got up quietly so not to disturb his wife. He softly descended the basement stairs, opened up the lock case to his service revolver, pulling the trigger with a smile. Shattering the stillness in what was his childhood house, Johnny made the news the next day. What a shock, everyone said. Why did he do it? He was such an outstanding young man. That came from hearing a story about actually instructors who teach artillery, and they have a high incidence of suicide.
The instructors?
Yeah, because they do too much. So a lot of soldiers get PTSD, and a lot of it is just even from that, from the sound of the artillery, and there's a lot of suicide involved. And
Well, I mean, that was so, I mean, horrifically, but tenderly captured in this piece with words and language. I mean, also you just the Johnny. I mean, that I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that was something that just naturally happened for you. It's interesting because it's really, you realize how strong of a name it is.
Right.
Even
and there's a song, Johnny Come Marching Home, so I think it
I
probably
mean,
came from that. I didn't even think about it. Yeah.
But the repetition really works, and
Right.
then also the way that the life unfolds in such a short period, in one page, right? I mean, it's a one-page poem.
That's
pretty
actually
much.
longer for me.
Oh, that's a longish poem for you?
Well,
Yeah.
in a way, I do a lot. I do mostly short. I try to capture a feeling in a short amount of space.
Wait, did you write songs as well at any point?
Not
in
really.
time? Because it's interesting.
Well,
At one point, I thought this has a musicality to it.
Most of my poetry does. It's
Yeah.
because the music's in me.
Yes.
And now it makes sense that I read with my friend on guitar.
Okay.
Because a lot of my writing is, there's probably a meter in my head.
I think so.
I mean, I was in a
based on
punk
that.
band for a short period
Oh,
of
were
time,
you?
and I wrote two punk songs. I don't know if, I don't know how literary they were, but
Well, maybe
yeah.
more literary than we think. I
Maybe.
actually am learning a lot. My son is a he plays the drums, he plays a little guitar,
Cool,
he's
cool.
into punk rock,
Uh-huh.
and other genres too. But
Right.
he teaches me a lot, and I think that
How old is he?
he is. I can't believe it. He's going to be 24 in December.
Oh,
He's
okay.
my youngest.
Is he in bands?
He plays around. I mean, he's not in a band right now, but he plays with different people here and there, like
Right.
jams. But I think that, I do think I'm friends with other musicians. I actually use music as a muse in some way.
Okay, me too, actually.
I mean, music is it's in my book,
Right.
songs and I think that music can be, I don't know, it can certainly be like it can feed.
A lot of my inspiration is from music,
It can feed the
or
work.
art, or
Absolutely.
film, or
Absolutely.
or other writers.
Absolutely.
Why don't you read something else?
Okay. I think I'll read a piece from the. Actually, no. You know what? I'm going to read a more kind of contemporary piece.
Okay.
This is a piece that is I wrote fairly recently after my husband and I went to Sicily less than 2 years ago.
Cool.
This is called Warm.
Was that your first time there?
No, we went on our honeymoon almost 32
Is that where your
years ago.
family lineage
His
is?
family, actually, my husband's half Sicilian, and his mother's family has a mixture of Irish and Hungarian. His dad's family's from Sicily,
Okay.
and my family's from both sides, from Calabria, the southern part of Italy. So we went to Sicily on our honeymoon, and then we went back just a couple of years ago, and this was after a swim, actually.
Okay.
This is called Warm Ice. We take turns going down a wooden ladder into the sea. The steps are rickety, home to what will probably become a splinter in my toe, but I am far from thinking about wood in flesh and tweezers and band-aids. The sea is translucent, what warm ice might look like if warm ice were a thing. It glistens in an everlasting way, this patch of blue where we steep. We tread water and our hearts beat hard, double timing. Our throats catch the warm morning air, our chests push and pull, in, out, in, out. These bodies of ours, when we're home and not immersed in a glassy body of Italian water at the start of a fresh day, we think of ourselves as people in the middle of our lives. I'm a middle-aged person, I say on some mornings when I slide out of bed and feel the rub of ankle and knee bones waking up, finding their rhythm. But here in Sicily, we move in time. Bones, breath, bodies change. We swim a while. Now we hear Il Mercato di Ortigia waking up too. Sounds of the canvases being lifted off rows of dried fruits, spices, and buckets of beans. Smells of fish, fruit, and fennel. I extend my arms out all the way and lift my face to greet the pale indigo sky. This is the sea. This is how the sea, an island, and a sunrise can peel away decades. Bones, breath, bodies change. We are young lovers again.
Nice.
Yeah, short.
There were a lot of senses in that.
Yes, short and
you talk about writing with senses.
Yeah, but I mean,
and physicality.
Physicality, right. And I do like to. I mean, I tend to write about my childhood and growing up and being a young girl a lot. But at times I do find like I said, I journal. So
you wrote this in Sicily?
I wrote some notes. I mean, that
Okay.
was a swim. That was an unforgettable swim. Like it was the morning, the sun was right. It was
Sounds
just like one of
beautiful.
those things. And I was like, and this is, I don't know if you feel this way, but like as a writer, there are experiences that I have and I'm like, I have to do something with this.
Right.
And I
Sure.
don't know what it's going to
Definitely.
be, but
Right. Yeah.
I have to find a way to illustrate this.
Well, I'm sure being there is a lot of inspiration.
Yeah.
The food and the people and the...
And it takes a long time.
It was probably a really beautiful beach, too.
It was a beautiful, Sicily's a beautiful island. And unfortunately, they're dealing with a lot of drought right now, which is sad.
Which is a worldwide situation.
Yes.
Did you write other things there?
I definitely took some notes. We went to Sicily a couple of years ago, and then I actually should mention this. I work with some colleagues, and it's called Key to the Castle Workshop. We have an LLC, and we do workshops and things, and one of them is in Italy. We've been doing it for a few years. So my husband came with me, and when I was working, he kind of did his thing during the day, and I was teaching, and then after that week, we went to Calabria, and I did write. I wrote while I was there, and I wound up contributing to, submitting the essay about being in Calabria. You'll appreciate this, like where my father's family was from, and just the sort of onslaught of feelings about identity and familiarity in terms of like things that I saw, things that made sense being there in his. In the
so
place
your father
where
came from...
My father didn't. He wasn't born there, but his father, my grandparents
right.
were, from there, and and I did write there. So in terms of when I write, and that's also always an interesting question. I know when I interview writers, I say like, do you write in the morning? Do you write at night? What's your routine? I do love to write in the morning, even if it's just a short. Even if it's like morning pages, Julia Cameron.
Is that because in the morning you're kind of like fresh and you're
I think so.
And it's quiet?
I'm also a morning person.
Right.
I kind of hit a wall creatively and intellectually at a certain point at night.
Right. Me too.
I mean,
I fall asleep on the couch at night.
Yeah, that happens to me too, and it didn't always. And I remember being
Although if I write at night, it's usually pretty disturbing.
Well, that's kind of the cool thing to take note of, like the times that you write and how it.
I never thought of doing that. But
Yeah,
it probably is an
I do
impact.
tell students, and I do this somewhat, but I say to students, like, keep a little notebook. I mean, people keep their phones next to their bed, which I know is a whole topic.
I've written both books completely on my iPhone.
You have?
Yeah, I've never. I use the computer just to edit.
Oh my gosh, that feels so like jarring to me.
I know.
I mean, I use my phone all the time. Don't get me wrong, but I am so slow.
Well, I can't. My handwriting is awful, so I hate to write hand.
Right.
And I'm like, I haven't been in front of a computer for a long time.
Right.
I became a chef late in life.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I'm not doing that anymore either. So it's been a long time since I was in an office or sat in front of a computer.
So you're really an artist. I mean, between the music, the poetry, and then the chef. I mean, I feel like that's an art, and also talk about like that's hard.
I started too late in life. I was 45, and my son was born 3 months later. So we had a kid late in life,
and you were working chef hours. Oh my gosh,
awful.
that's hard.
Yeah.
Yes, I know some chefs and know that it doesn't always align with a family.
Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say before we finish
Just
up?
that I'm really. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. This was great, and I'm going to definitely wear my
Awesome.
button proudly.
And I can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving me your book too. It was a nice exchange.
Yeah,
and,
it's fun to do that.
And I do agree that this bookstore is amazing. I'm going to swing through before I head out. Thank you for having me, and it was nice to be able to exchange ideas about the process.
You've been a great guest.
Thank you.
Give it up for Kathy Curto.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to Storytelling on Orchard Street with a fantastic guest, Kathy Curto. Look for her work online, buy her book, check out what she's going to be doing in the future. Stay in touch with her, as I will. So again, Storytelling on Orchard Street, recorded in the podcast studios of P&T Knitwear Bookstore, 180 Orchard Street. Thank you all for listening, watching, however you consumed this show.